Seventh grade review, How Man Began. Seventh grade content is all about how man began and developed into a being that lived in complex societies. To examine these societies, we looked at government, culture, economics, geography, and historical perspective. Government. As man began to live in groups, called societies, things became more complicated. That is where government entered the picture. Government provided rules, order, and structure for people to live together. We studied the following forms of governments: monarchy, oligarchy, tyranny, empire, democracy, republic, and feudalism. Monarchy, a government headed by a king or queen. Monarchies are usually hereditary, meaning power is passed down within one family from father to son. The king or queen holds supreme power. Oligarchy, a government headed by a small group of people. Under oligarchy, the people who hold the power most often use that power for their own benefit. Sparta had an oligarchy. Tyranny. Tyranny is a form of government where the person in power, called a tyrant, holds the power through the use of force. It is a very harsh form of government. Empire. Different peoples, different lands, and different cultures, all under the rule of one government. An empire is headed by an emperor. Democracy. The people run the government. Ancient Athens invented democracy. Republic. Representative democracy, which means the people elect representatives to govern for them. Rome invented republican government. The United States is a republic. Feudalism, a form of government where land is exchanged for loyalty and military service. Feudalism was the government which existed during the Middle Ages. Culture. Culture is how people live. This includes religion, social hierarchy, which is a division of society into classes of people, technology, the arts and sciences, customs, writing, laws, language, and warfare. We studied two categories of religion. Monotheism, belief in one God. Judaism, Islam, and Christianity are monotheistic. Polytheism, belief in many gods. Just about every civilization we studied was polytheistic. Societies were often broken into divisions of people with the ruler on top and the slaves and peasants at the bottom. Different technologies, as well as the arts and sciences, were developed by different civilizations. These advancements often improved civilization. All ancient civilizations had their own cultures. Mummification was part of Egyptian culture. The development of a writing system was a very important advancement of civilization. Why? Having a written code of laws meant that everyone was able to know what the laws were, and that the laws couldn't be changed arbitrarily. The development of a language allowed people to work together more easily. Warfare. The ancient world and the Middle Ages were very violent places to live. The development of new technologies, such as chariots and iron weapons, allowed civilizations to conquer each other. Warfare spread technology and other cultural advancements between different civilizations. Cultural diffusion. the spread of one culture from one civilization to another. Economics. Economics is about business and how people earn a living. These were common jobs in the ancient world. Farmer, which was most common, trader, craftsman, soldier, scribe, priest, government worker. Trade was an important part of the ancient economy. Through trade, knowledge, ideas, and technology were exchanged between civilizations. New areas of the world were explored. New settlements were founded as trading posts. People obtained resources that weren't locally available, and people were able to sell surplus resources. Civilizations became rich through trade. Civilizations went to war over trade routes. For example, the Mycenaeans versus Troy, that was the Trojan War. Rome versus Carthage, those were the Punic Wars. The Phoenicians invented the alphabet to help them in trade. The Phoenicians then spread their alphabet to the cultures they traded with. This is an example of cultural diffusion. Geography. Early peoples settled in areas that were rich in resources: water, fertile soil, minerals such as copper, tin, gold, and clay, fuel, which included wood and peat, timber, flint, and obsidians that were used for making tools, and animals. How people lived depended on where they lived. People who lived near forests built homes from wood. People who didn't made homes from mud or stones. The world's first societies formed along river valleys. Crops grown on the fertile land along these rivers fed large populations. Some geographic features also protected early civilizations. For example, Egypt. In the north was the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile Cataracts, which were large waterfalls, were to the south, and there were massive deserts to the west and the east. Historical perspective. How has the past affected the America of today? A republican form of government. We got this from Rome. Monotheism. We got this from Judaism. Nonviolent protest. This was Indian Jainism. The arts, science, and technology. Well, from China, we got fireworks and gunpowder. From Greece, we got philosophy and the theater. From Egypt, we got embalming. From Mesopotamia, we got written laws, the wheel, the sail, and the plow. And we got our alphabet from the Phoenicians. How do we study the past? Artifacts. Something created and used by humans. Fossils. A part or imprint of something that was alive. Primary sources. These include diaries, old newspapers, photography or artwork, documents and records, videotape, and eyewitness accounts. Secondary sources. Textbooks, movies that are about an event or a time period, hearsay, gossip, reproductions, historical fiction, including movies. Who studies the past? Archaeologist. Someone who studies the past based upon what people left behind. Historian. People who study history to discover how people lived and why they did the things they did. Early man. Early man lived during the Stone Age. The Stone Age is the era where people used stone tools and weapons. The Stone Age is broken into three periods. The Paleolithic period, called the Old Stone Age, P for the past. The Mesolithic period, the Middle Stone Age, M for middle. Neolithic period, the New Stone Age, N for new. Hominids. Ancestors of early man. Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, was the first hominid to walk upright on two legs. This left her arms free for other purposes than walking, such as carrying, defense, and acquiring things. Homo habilis, handyman, was the first to use simple tools, things like sticks and stones. Tools were used for chopping, cutting, and scraping. Tools could be used for food, to make shelter, and for defense. Homo erectus, upright man, used basic tools, things like a spear and an axe, walked upright, migrated out of Africa, and controlled fire. Tools, the ability to walk, and the ability to control fire allowed Homo erectus to live in colder climates. Homo sapiens, wise man, was able to create fire. He used complex tools, things like a bow and arrow, developed language, and migrated around the world. There are three types of tools: simple, basic, and complex. Simple tools are sticks and stones. Basic tools are stone attached to a wooden shaft, things like a spear and an axe. Complex tools are two basic tools that are used together: a bow and arrow, a fish hook which has the hook and the line, and a needle and a thread, or a paintbrush and a paint pot. These are all complex tools. During the Old and Middle Stone Ages, people were hunter-gatherers. That's all people were, hunter-gatherers. A hunter-gatherer is someone who spends all their time hunting for animals and gathering roots, berries, and nuts to eat. During the Neolithic Age, people stopped following the food supply. They began to make their own food. The Neolithic Revolution. This is an extremely important concept. Man stopped hunting and gathering. People got food from growing crops and raising animals. A stable food supply developed. People used domesticated animals for transportation and farming. People now live together in permanent communities. People could now focus on other activities than just finding food. This was called job specialization. What ended the Stone Age? The development of metal tools and weapons. Civilization begins. The 7 characteristics of civilization: a stable food supply, division of society into groups, government, religion, art and science, technology, and writing. Mesopotamia. The world's first civilization began in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia has different names. These include land between the rivers and the Fertile Crescent. Mesopotamia was a fertile, crescent-shaped area of land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is present-day Iraq. At times, different civilizations dominated in Mesopotamia. These include the Sumerian, the Babylonian, the Hittites, the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, and the Akkadians. Sumerians, Sumer, the world's first civilization. The Sumerians invented irrigation, which provided a stable food supply. They also invented the wheel, the sail, and the plow. The Sumerians invented the world's first writing system, cuneiform, which were wedge-shaped marks pressed into a clay tablet. We did this with Play-Doh at the beginning of the year. Babylonians, Hammurabi, the Babylonian king who posted the first written code of laws. Written laws meant that the law couldn't be changed, and everyone is able to know what the laws are. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, are just some of the laws that were posted by Hammurabi. Akkadians, led by Sargon, who was not a Power Ranger, but the first Akkadian king. Sargon created the first world empire. The Hittites. The Hittites weren't really in Mesopotamia, they were in Asia Minor, which is Turkey. The Hittites invented the chariot and iron tools and weapons. And then the Hittites used the chariot and the iron weapons to create an empire. The Assyrians. These were the ferocious warriors of the ancient age. They were feared by all. Their capital was at Nineveh. The Assyrians were effective administrators of an empire. They built a strong central government. They built roads that connected the empire so they could administrate it. And ironically, they established the world's first library. The Assyrians were the people who cut off the heads of the defeated on the battlefield and then lobbed the heads into the town they were besieging. Chaldeans. They were related to the Babylonians of Hammurabi. The capital of their empire was at Babylon. They were led by Nebuchadnezzar, who built the famous Hanging Gardens. The Chaldeans were great astronomers, and they were first to really map the heavens. They also created the world's first calendar and caused the first Jewish diaspora by causing everyone living in Jerusalem to leave and move to Babylon. All the Mesopotamian empires and kingdoms were polytheistic. Each city had a temple called the ziggurat at its center. Egypt, a unique, long-lasting civilization. The Egyptian civilization began when hunter-gatherers settled along the Nile Valley and began to farm. Upper Egypt was located at the bottom of the country, closer to the source of the Nile. Lower Egypt was located at the top of the country in the Nile Delta. Egyptian kings were called pharaohs, which means great house. Menes was the first pharaoh to unite Upper and Lower Egypt, and this is shown in the double crown he wore. Egyptian history is divided into three periods called kingdoms. Old Kingdom, 2700 to 2200 BC. A strong central government was established. The pharaoh kept strict control of the food supply by overseeing the harvest and storing extra grain. This is the time when the pyramids were built. The Middle Kingdom, 2000 to 1800 BC. This was a reunification period that showed great achievements in art, literature, and architecture. The Hyksos invasion and occupation ended the period. The New Kingdom, 1600 to 1100 BC. Egypt's Golden Age. Rulers increased trade. Trade brings wealth and new resources, and to prevent future invasions, Egypt conquers other civilizations and becomes an empire. Egyptian kingdoms were broken into periods of rule by different families called dynasties. Hatshepsut was the first female pharaoh. She was known for her trading mission to Punt and for building many temples. The trading mission to Punt brought back strange animals, plants, and great riches. Tutankhamun was a new kingdom pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. The discovery of his tomb brought new understanding about Egyptian culture. Ramses II was a 19th century pharaoh who had a very long reign and was a famous warrior. He also had over 100 wives and 90 sons. Decline of Egypt. More foreign invasions. The empire became difficult to maintain. War was expensive. This is a picture of Cleopatra VII, who was the last pharaoh of Egypt. The Rosetta Stone. Discovered by a soldier of Napoleon in the late 18th century, has allowed us to figure out Egyptian hieroglyphics. Because the Nile floods were so regular, Egypt was able to produce food for export. Egypt became known as the breadbasket of the ancient world. Egyptians used papyrus reeds to make a form of paper. Their writing system used pictographs called hieroglyphics. Scribes, people whose job was to write letters and keep records, could move up in Egyptian society. The Egyptians were good at engineering, architecture, and art. Because ancient Egyptians mummified their dead, they knew a lot about the human body. India. Like ancient Egypt, India was protected by landforms. It was surrounded on three sides by water. Some of the highest mountain ranges in the world are in the north. Indian civilization began along the Indus River. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were the two major cities of this first civilization. It was very advanced, but the civilization ended suddenly and probably violently, but no one knows why. This civilization was the first to grow cotton and make cotton cloth. Ancient Indian society was broken into a strict caste system, which is a division of society. You could not associate with people outside your own caste. India is home to some of the world's great religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. Hinduism is just complicated. It is polytheistic. Brahman is the universal spirit. Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu represent different aspects of Brahman. Reincarnation. Souls are born and reborn many times in new physical form, and the type of physical form you are born into depends upon the type of person you were in your previous life. This is called karma. Buddhism, also complicated, based upon the teaching of Siddhartha Gautama, an Indian prince. The purpose of Buddhism is to relieve human suffering and reach enlightenment through following an eightfold path, nirvana, a state of perfect peace. People who don't reach nirvana in their present life must be reborn until it is achieved. Buddhism spreads to China and Japan, which is an example of cultural diffusion. Jainism. There are four main principles to Jainism: injure no life, tell the truth, do not steal, own no property. They practiced ahimsa, which means nonviolence. This influenced the American civil rights movement, nonviolence. Indian achievements. They invented zero, which led to the Hindu-Arabic numerals we use today. They invented cotton cloth, and they were known for their metallurgy, which meant they made high-quality tools and weapons out of metal. They invented inoculation, which we use today to get shots to prevent disease. They had great literature and art, and they built magnificent temples. China. China's geography presented many problems. It separated China from its neighbors. It separated the Chinese within China from each other. The Gobi Desert was in the north. The Pacific Ocean was in the east. There were mountains in the west, and the Tibetan Plateau was in the south. The Chinlen Shanди Mountains separate northern China from southern China. Two major river systems link the Chinese people: the Huanghe, which is the Yellow River, the Changjiang, which is the Yangtze River. Rivers flow from east to west. Communities can communicate with each other as long as they are located on the same river, and the Chinlen Shanди Mountains separate the two river systems. The Shang were one of China's first civilizations. The Shang often consulted their ancestors by writing questions on bones or shells and then placing them in the fire. The cracks that developed would be interpreted as answers. These were called oracle bones. Just like Egypt, over the course of China's long history, it has been ruled by many different dynasties. Dynasties are ruled by a family of rulers. The Warring States period was a very difficult time. Chinese government was often influenced by philosophy. Family ties and respect have always been very important, and Buddhism was a factor. Confucianism. This is a philosophy that was developed by a man named Confucius that people in China still pay attention to today. It sought to bring order to an entire way of life. The goal was to achieve perfect harmony between family, community, and society. Confucianism felt children need to obey fathers, families need to obey the king, but the kings had to rule justly and fairly. And Confucianism influenced the Han Dynasty and how they ruled. Taoism. The goal is to become one with the cosmos. It appeals to people who want to withdraw from politics and intrigue. There's a reverence for nature and ancestor spirits. Life should be a balance, such as yin and yang, and it influenced astrology, martial arts, medicine, and feng shui. Legalism. Legalism means strict laws and harsh punishments. The system of laws run the states and not the rulers. Laws should reward those who obey and punish those who do not, and it influenced the Qin dynasty. Chinese achievements. There are so many I couldn't list them all. First to plant crops in rows, they invented paper, they invented paper money. The Chinese invented gunpowder and fireworks, they invented the seismograph, they invented the wheelbarrow, they invented the sundial, and they had governments based on philosophy. The Phoenicians. Phoenicia was a narrow strip of a country that was very mountainous and bad for farming. So the Phoenicians turned to the sea and became traders. The Phoenicians used the timber that grew on their mountainous land to build ships. They became expert sailors and shipbuilders. They began to trade purple dye made from the murex mussels they found along their seacoasts. They invented the alphabet to help with their trade and keep records, and they established many trading colonies that grew into large cities like Carthage. Hebrews, Israel, Judaism, these are all the same thing. The ancient Hebrews, also called Jews, and the Israelites were unique in the ancient world in that their culture was monotheistic, belief in one God. Jewish culture, belief in justice for everyone regardless of rank or status, the importance of education, the importance of following the law, which applied to everyone equally. Their laws were both moral, for example, the Ten Commandments, and civil, meaning everyday life. They believed in charity, and they also believed you don't work on the Sabbath, which became our weekend. Several times during their history, the Jews have been forced to leave their homeland of Israel. This has been called the Jewish diaspora. Jewish beliefs and customs have become part of our Western culture. Monotheism, the importance of education. The Jewish holy book, called the Torah, is also the first 5 books of our Bible and the Muslim Quran. The belief in charity, the laws that apply to everyone. Laws are both moral and civil. The concept of the weekend. Jewish teachings influence Christianity, and the Jewish diaspora causes many Jews to live in many different communities around the world. Greece. Crete, the Minoan civilization. You can see the island of Crete in front of you in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The Minoans of Crete. They began as farmers, but their strategic location in the Mediterranean led them to trade. They became expert shipbuilders and sailors. They traded for resources not available on Crete. They had a very advanced culture. The large palace of Knossos was at the center of the city. They believed in polytheism. The great goddess, Mother Earth, was most important. The Minoan civilization ended suddenly. No one knows why. They think because of a volcanic eruption. The Minoans built the world's first open-air arena where they practiced the popular sport of bull leaping. The Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were originally from the grasslands of Russia. They settled as shepherds and farmers in mainland Greece. The Mycenaeans invented the olive press and turned to trade. A warlike people, they often raided other settlements. The Mycenaeans led the attack against Troy in the Trojan War, and later they settled in Ionia, the Greek islands. The Greek city-states and Hellenistic culture. Geography had a huge impact on ancient Greece. 75 to 85% of Greece is mountainous. Greece has more miles of coastline than the U.S. It is surrounded by the sea. Greek is comprised of a mainland, the Peloponnesian Peninsula, and many islands. The mountains and the sea caused barriers between Greek settlements, so each settlement developed separately. Settlements were called city-states or polis. Allegiance was to one city-state. All Greeks spoke the same language and worshipped the same gods. The polis. Each polis had its own personality, goals, laws, and customs. Greek city-states might band together to fight a common enemy, but they were not united. Sometimes the city-states fought against each other. The two best-known city-states were Athens and Sparta. Each developed a completely different culture. Athens, located near the sea, it had a worldly view, and its resources were obtained through trade. Athens considered itself the shining star of Greek city-states. It was famous for literature, poetry, drama, theater, schools, buildings, and government. Athens invented democracy, and their emphasis was on education, only for men. Athenian democracy. Free men were citizens of the polis and had an obligation to participate in government. The Council of 500 ran the day-to-day business of government and suggested new laws. Membership in the council was drawn by lot. The assembly, which required 6,000 citizens for it to meet, debated and voted on laws suggested by the council. The government was located in the middle of town. Athenian democracy was direct democracy. Its citizens had to vote on everything. Sparta. Sparta had a warrior culture. The Spartans were brought up to endure unbelievable pain and hardship. Their government was oligarchy. The goal of education in Sparta was to make a strong warrior. Women had some rights and received some education because the men were always off fighting. Spartan life was spent in the military, and their slaves, called helots, did all the work. Spartan oligarchy. Sparta was run by the Council of Elders, consisting of 2 kings and 28 older men. Laws passed by the Council of Elders were voted on by the Assembly, a group of citizens who met in an isolated location on the outside of town. Let's contrast Athens and Sparta. In trade, Athens used coins. They had an agora, which was a marketplace. They traded for resources they didn't have, and the Athenians embraced foreigners. On the other hand, Sparta, who didn't like to trade, used iron bars. What they didn't produce themselves, they got from stealing and conquering, and the Spartans were suspicious of outsiders. The Persian Wars. By 550 BC, the Persians, under Cyrus the Great, had built a mighty empire. Persia. Persia is centered in what is modern-day Iran. The Persians were mild rulers. They allowed conquered peoples to keep their customs and religion. The Persians had a well-organized army. The Immortals were their crack unit of 10,000 soldiers. There was a network of roads that linked the empire, and provinces were governed by satraps, people who collected taxes, acted as judges, and put down rebellions. Persia decides to conquer Greece. The Persian Wars. The Persian Wars were a series of 5 major battles fought between the Greek city-states and Persia over a 20-year period. The first was the Ionian Revolt. Greek islands objected to be under Persian rule. Athens decided to help the islands, and Persia then decided to attack Athens. The Battle of Marathon. The Persian king Darius landed troops 26 miles north of Athens and is dealt a crushing loss. A Greek messenger sprinted to Athens to deliver the news of victory. Crying Nike, the messenger died. The Marathon Road Race today celebrates this event. The Battle of Thermopylae, also known as the Stand of the 300. Sparta and Athens banded together to defend Greece against Xerxes, the new Persian king. 300 Spartans held off thousands of Persian soldiers in a narrow mountain pass outside Athens, but eventually the Spartans were betrayed. This battle is remembered for unparalleled bravery. The Battle of Salamis. The Spartan stand at Thermopylae allowed the Athenians the time to evacuate the city and prepare for a naval battle. The Persians marched to Athens, burned the city, but are then soundly defeated in an ocean strait near the city. The Battle of Plataea. This battle combined Spartan and Athenian forces against a Persian army. Xerxes, the Persian king, then abandons all plans to conquer Greece. Following the Persian Wars, Athens formed a defensive alliance between many Greek city-states that was called the Delian League. Sparta did not join. The Athenian leader Pericles then uses Delian League monies to rebuild Athens gloriously. The Peloponnesian War. This was the war between Athens and Sparta. Many city-states were upset by the growing power of Athens and Athens' use of the Delian League money to rebuild the city. The Peloponnesian War tore Greece apart. At the end of the war, plague struck Athens, killing Pericles, and Sparta ends up winning the war, but Greece is irreparably weakened. The Peloponnesian War left Greece in such a weakened state that Philip II, king of Macedonia, was easily able to conquer it. Fortunately, Philip was a huge admirer of Greek culture. So was his son, Alexander the Great. Both Philip and Alexander the Great spread Greek ideas and culture throughout the empire they created. The result was Hellenistic culture, a culture heavily influenced by Greek ideas, but also having influences from other civilizations such as Egypt, Persia, and the Middle East. There were so many Greek achievements, it is impossible to mention them all. Democracy. The Olympics, held every 4 years in Olympia. No excuses, victors bring honor to their polis, no other rewards. Realistic sculpture, especially the moving body. Architecture, drama, comedy, tragedy, the theater. Special effects, and revolving scenery. The Greeks wrote the first history books, lyric and epic poetry, the Greek alphabet, which modified the Phoenician. Our alphabet is based upon the Greek. In fact, our name, Alpha plus Beta, is alphabet, the first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet. The Greek language has influenced English. Philosophy. We had the philosophers Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Pythagorean and Euclidean geometry. Astronomy, latitude and longitude. Hippocrates, the father of medicine. Archimedes and the lever, and his theory of buoyancy. Alexander the Great. Alexander was truly great. He was educated by Aristotle. He took over his father's empire at age 20. He created the largest empire the world had seen at that point. He actually marched his army off the map in India. He built many new cities, particularly Alexandria in Egypt, and these cities were based upon Greek designs. And then he died at 33, possibly from disease, but no one really knows. After Alexander died, his empire was divided among his top 3 generals. One general got Greece and Macedonia, another general got Persia, Asia Minor, and the Middle East, and the last general got Egypt, which shows you what a rich country it was. This became the Ptolemaic dynasty, and Cleopatra was a descendant of that general. The Roman Republic. Rome was located in the middle of the Italian peninsula, which is located in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. This is a good trade location. The first civilized people of Italy were the Etruscans, who ruled Rome for a while. The Roman sport of gladiator fighting grew out of Etruscan funeral customs. Rome was founded by 2 brothers, Romulus and Remus. The brothers had been abandoned as infants and were raised by a she-wolf. Romulus and Remus established a city on 7 hills, but ended up fighting. Romulus killed Remus. Romulus then named the new city after himself. Under the Etruscans, Roman society was divided into 2 classes of people, the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians had all the money and power. The plebeians made up 95% of Rome's population. In 509 BC, Rome rose up against the Etruscans and threw them out. Rome then established a republic, the Roman Republic. Most of the power is in the hands of the Senate. The Senate was a group of 300 men elected by the patricians. Senators serve for life. The Senate's decisions are treated as law, and 2 elected leaders called consuls share command of the army. The conflict of the orders. This was a struggle between the patricians and the plebeians. The plebeians got tired of their lack of representation in the Roman Republic. The plebeians were tired of having to serve in the army, and the plebeians wanted to have the laws written down and posted in a public place. Over time, the plebeians wrest more and more power from the patricians. Roman government offices. Other offices included tribune of the plebs, who spoke for the plebeians to the Senate and the consuls, and also dictator. Dictators were men who were given special powers for a limited period of time, such as war. Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus was held up as the ideal Roman citizen. Cincinnatus agreed to be dictator, but willingly gave up power and returned to his farm when the crisis had ended. George Washington has been compared to Cincinnatus. The 12 Tables of Roman Law. These were laws that addressed property, crime, family, theft, marriage, and inheritance that were written down and posted in the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum, the political and economic center of Rome. It would be similar to a town square today. Rome begins to expand, creating blessings and problems. First, Rome conquers Italy. Then it slowly expands across the Mediterranean. Wealth and slaves pour into Rome, and the Roman army becomes a force to be reckoned with. Farmers lose their farms, being at war so much, and the displaced farmers move to Rome. They can't get jobs there because slaves are there doing most of the work, and there is no employment for Roman citizens. Rome then institutes laws providing for support of the poor. The Punic Wars. Trade wars fought between Carthage and Rome. These were a series of 3 wars fought over a 100-year period. During the Second Punic War, Hannibal led elephants over the Alps. Carthage loses all 3 wars and is destroyed in the process, making Rome the undisputed power in the Mediterranean. The Gracchi, Roman reforms. 2 brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, tried to address the problems caused by displaced farmers after the Punic Wars. Both were elected tribune. Both were assassinated by wealthy Romans who feared their reforms. Romans then began to see that violence could be used as a political weapon. Marius and Sulla. Both were generals who tried to gain power. Both built powerful private armies. Civil war erupted between these two gentlemen, and both used their power to punish their enemies. Julius Caesar, Veni Vidi Vici, a popular general who conquered Gaul, which is France. He was murdered by a group of his fellow senators on the Ides of March in 44 BC. The senators feared Caesar would use his popularity to end the republic and make himself king. Civil war breaks out following Caesar's death. His friend Mark Antony and his nephew Octavian hunt down Caesar's murderers. Mark Antony takes up with Cleopatra, ignoring his wife, who is Octavian's sister. Octavian defeats Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. Antony and Cleopatra commit suicide, and Octavian takes over power in Rome. In 27 BC, the Senate names Octavian Roman Emperor. He takes the name Augustus Caesar. The Roman Republic ends, but the Roman Empire lasts for another 400 years. The Roman Empire is the only time all the lands around the Mediterranean have been under the control of one government. The Roman Empire also included Western Europe, Great Britain, Asia Minor, and Mesopotamia. The Romans called the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, or RC. Rome and trade. Roman conquests promote trade. Trade brought metals, food, cloth, spices, and exotic animals to Rome. Rome exported jewelry, glass, and clothing. The Romans used gold and silver coins to pay for their trade goods. Nearly everyone accepted Roman coins, which helped trade grow even more. The Pax Romana, or Roman peace, lasted from 27 BC to 180 AD. There were no major wars or rebellions in the empire. Roman population grew, trade increased, making Romans wealthy. The quality of life improved for people in Rome and all of its provinces. Roman roads. 55,000 miles of roads linked the empire. The roads were built to move armies. They had facilities, services, and milestones along the way. They were so well built that some Roman roads are still being used today. And there's a saying, all roads lead to Rome. Roman Christianity. The Romans considered Christians a threat and persecuted them. But Christianity continued to grow throughout the Roman Empire. Then one day, the Emperor Constantine became a Christian himself. With that, the Roman Empire becomes a Christian empire. The decline of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire got to be too large to govern effectively. There was a decline of military strength, and many of the people serving in the army were not Roman citizens. The rich were too lazy to help solve problems, while the poor were overworked, overtaxed, and very unhappy. There were many barbarian invasions, and the problem with the emperors is that they were selected by violence, or they were just born at the job and were not up to it. There was a lot of disease, there was inflation and decline in trade, and the increased use of slaves continued to cause problems from republic through empire. What did Rome do? It split its empire in half. The western half was based in Rome. The eastern half was based in Constantinople. The fall of Rome. After the split, the western half of the Roman Empire continued to decline. Rome was sacked by the Goths in 410 AD. Roman contributions. Republic. Electing people to govern for you, a form of democracy. The arch. The aqueduct, which brought water to the population of Rome. Cement. The Latin language. The calendar. Law. Sports arenas. Apartment buildings. Welfare for the poor. Fast food restaurants, Roman style of course. Firemen, a police force, and a network of roads. The Byzantine Empire. The eastern half of the empire thrived as Rome declined. It was influenced by Greek ideas and cultures. Its brand of Christianity was different from that practiced in Rome. During the Middle Ages, Constantinople was Europe's largest and wealthiest city. Constantinople was a center for culture and learning. The Byzantine Empire lasted another 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, until it was sacked by Christian soldiers during the Crusades. The Middle Ages, aka the Dark Ages and the Medieval period. Many of the achievements of ancient Rome were forgotten following the sack of Rome. Western Europe regressed and became a violent, unstable, uneducated, and often dirty society. Europe's climate and topography created many different ways of life. There would be a great variety in medieval life amongst the Vikings of Scandinavia, the serfs of Northern Europe, and the city-states of Italy. Feudalism. The dominant form of government during the Middle Ages was feudalism. Feudalism was an exchange of land for loyalty and military service. The person who supplied the loyalty and military service was called a vassal. It was more important to have security than civic rights during the Middle Ages. The lord, also called nobles, owed allegiance to the king, but they were strong and powerful in their own right. Knight, a vassal of the lord who fought on horseback and followed a code of honorable behavior called chivalry. Serf, a peasant who worked the noble's land or the knight's and who was unable to leave. The manor. Vassals lived on estates called the manor. Manors were self-sufficient, meaning they made everything they needed. Sometimes manors were fortified castles. The manor, plus the labor who worked the land, were called fiefs. Serfs were peasants who were not slaves, but were unable to leave the manor. The castle. Because the nobles were always at war, their homes were fortified. Castles would be able to provide protection during an attack or a siege to the serfs. The castle had the ability to store food and water to withstand sieges which could last for months. Charlemagne created the Holy Roman Empire in 800 AD. He wanted to bring all of Western Europe under his control. He was able to convince the barbarian tribes to accept Christianity. The result was a Christian empire made up of France, Germany, Austria, Italy, and northern Spain. Charlemagne's contributions. He improved education, opened schools, had religious manuscripts copied, and gathered scholars together. The consequence: Europe's religious and social life were shaped for centuries. Charlemagne set up law courts and wrote a code of laws. The consequence was that it strengthened feudalism. Charlemagne's rule was considered a golden age for the early medieval period. The Battle of Tours, led by Charles the Hammer Martel, a French army defeats an invading Muslim force in 732 AD, with the result that Europe remained Christian, not Muslim. The Roman Catholic Church. One thing that continued to grow and spread across Europe after the fall of Rome was Christianity. The Church united Western Europe. It took a leading role in government, law, art, and learning. Popes, missionaries, and monks spread Christianity. The Church passed on the heritage of the Roman Empire, and Latin, the Roman language, was the official language of the Church. Popes held great power because almost everyone belonged to the Church. The Pope was a religious as well as a political leader. Popes and kings often engaged in power struggles. People who disobeyed the Pope were excommunicated, which meant they couldn't go to heaven. Daily life in the Middle Ages revolved around the Church. All important events had a religious ceremony. Tithing, giving 10% of what you earned to the church, made the church rich. The church was the largest landholder in Europe. The clergy included the Pope, cardinals, archbishops, bishops, and village priests, monks, nuns, friars, and abbots. Often the village priest, who was as poor as the people he served, was the only one in the village who could read and write. Monks made monastery centers of learning during the Middle Ages. The Norman Conquest. In 1066, William the Conqueror, who was William Duke of Normandy, won the Battle of Hastings and took control of the English throne. This had a permanent effect upon English life. William instituted a powerful monarchy, the census, and strengthened feudalism. It began a rivalry with France that would last 1,000 years. The French language, used by the invading Normans, had an impact on the English language, especially in the area of nouns and adjectives. The Magna Carta, 1215, a document which limited the powers of the monarch and preserved the basic legal rights of all free men in England. The Magna Carta established the principle that not even the king is above the law. The Crusades, a series of wars fought between Christians and Muslims to take back the Holy Land. Most of the Crusades were unsuccessful. The Crusades caused a collision between the Western Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic Empire. Consequences of the Crusades in Europe. Increased desires of Western Europeans for Eastern trade such as goods and spices. It broke down feudalism. While the knights were off fighting in the Holy Land, the king was increasing his power back home. And a desire for wealth, power, and land began to overpower religious ideas. Consequences of the Crusades on the Byzantine Empire. So angry at the behavior and greed of barbarian crusaders, a permanent split develops between Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire. Also, weakened by the sacking of Constantinople by the Crusaders, Constantinople succumbs to a Muslim takeover. The Black Death. Bubonic plague killed 1/3 to 1/2 of all people in Western Europe during the late Middle Ages. The plague is spread by fleas and rats. The plague causes labor shortages, so serfs are freed from the land and now receive wages from their work. This is a picture of how doctors used to dress to treat plague victims, and then on the right is a map showing the spread of the Black Death. How did towns begin? Well, towns provided goods not available on the manors. Before towns, markets were held once a week around the manor. They sold basic items, and fairs were held once every year for several weeks. The fair sold international goods. Finally, the merchants who sold things at the fairs got tired of moving around, so they settled along trade routes. They were accompanied by artisans and craftsmen who moved to towns and brought their families, and consumers followed the artisans and craftsmen. The rise of cities. Cities began as trading centers that grew into towns that got bigger and became a city. Cities were located on important sea routes such as Venice and Flanders. Overland trade routes followed sea routes. Towns, then cities, became established inland. Consequences of the rise of cities and towns. Nobles fear cities and towns as a threat to their power. Churches fear cities and towns because they believe their profit-making interferes with religion. But kings like cities and towns. They give them charters, allowing them to run their own affairs. The need for educated businessmen causes schools and universities to be established. Guilds were established to protect merchants and craftsmen and provide quality control. Guild ranks included apprentice, journeyman, and master. Guilds took care of sick members as well as the widows and children of all members. Guilds provided quality control and price regulation. The Middle Ages ended with the Renaissance. During the Renaissance period, man tried to relearn what had been lost since the fall of Rome.